Okay, dear students and viewers, today I have just appeared before you with a great motto, and that is to discuss with you people on the issue of nationalism. Why? Reason being, in today's the global as well as the national scenario, there are certain controversial issues and ideologies. You can say better isms: nationalism, socialism, and Marxism, secularism. So many isms are there to be discussed by, a different varieties of scholars all over the world. In order to enlighten my students and audience, I have brought the trilogy of lectures, not a single one lecture, trilogy of lectures, which I am going to discuss. But before that, I have to make a short announcement. I have just started my English channel as well in order to cater the interest of the students exclusively from English medium. But those students who are bilingual, they can even switch over to my English channel as well, and better to take subscription even in Hindi channel, because same lecture will never be repeated again. I'll just formulate different lectures and deliver different lectures on both the channels. Sometime there the issue of one issue in this channel, another on English channel. Then I am just seeking pardon from those students whenever I am just bringing some lecture in English. My Hindi audience is normally creating some sort of pressure why I am not going to formulate and deliver the same lecture in Hindi medium as well. It is due to the fact, my friends, that the same lecture to be repeated again and again, that is slightly or a bit boring for me. So that's why in order to change my taste, I have just, you can say, decided to bring different sorts of topics and the different varieties of topics on my channels. I've now come to the point. Firstly, just observe this trilogy of lectures. In today's scenario, if you will just observe the trilogy of lectures, some sort of mist on which is just lingering on our intellectual side, so that will be completely removed. What is nationalism? How did it emerge or originate, and where? What was its initial nature, character? How did it travel to different parts of the world? Did nationalism the single one or many? Whether appropriate term is nationalism or nationalisms? Did nationalism manifest itself in the same manner or in the same color in different regions and different continents? So let us be familiar with this issue first. So that's why I have used the term nationalism how to change the world. How to change the world. In the series, this is the first one lecture. And here, I have to admit frankly before you, I have inspired by this topic, or you can say I have rather borrowed this topic from Eric Hobsbawm with slight change. Eric Hobsbawm has just written one of his books in 2011. That is possibly the last composition. After that, after some time, this great scholar passed away. Marxism, how to change the world. So that's why I have used the term nationalism, how to change the world. In this lecture today, I will discuss about how did nationalism emerge, originate in certain parts of Europe first. Then when it traveled from Western Europe to Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, how did its nature was going to change. Then when nationalism traveled from European continent to other continents, so what problems, the leaders and people of other continents faced while imitating the model of European nationalism. So this is the basic theme of my lecture today, and then the same lecture will continue in 2 more classes. The second one topic would be how unique is Indian nationalism. Indian nationalism. In this lecture, you people will come to know that India is supposed to be a trendsetter in course of the national movement, because Gandhi left his legacy, or rather Indian national movement left its legacy, which became an ideal model for different countries in the world, and the Indian experiment even proved inspiring for so many Asian African nations. But here, my friends and viewers, here I have to inform you that India was not simply a trendsetter in the matter of national liberation movement, but it was equally a trendsetter in nation building as well. India did the very unique experiment in nation building, and India can work as a major inspiration for the people of the world. And this lecture is much important for you. Then, in humanities and social science, I have always tried to educate my students and viewers. Firstly, we have to adapt our mind to the study of social science. It is different from natural science. In social science, nothing is full and final. No truth is absolute truth. There is always some space for controversy. We can deliver simply one and dominant phenomena of truth, but we are not going to give the final truth. Nobody. So my students, the third lecture is eye-opener for you. At least we have to hear the other party as well. Now, in the present scenario of, ultra-nationalism, sometimes the people used to prefer the term even rightist nationalism or even muscular nationalism. Now, the model of nationalism which had earlier been followed by our national leaders in course of the liberation movement of India, so this model of nationalism is being persistently questioned by the new scholars. And once they are just trying to revive the old model of nationalism of V.D. Savarkar, and they try to prove that definitely Congress missed the bus, the Indian national leaders did some mistake, and the type of freedom which India had gained at that time, so that was definitely having a faulty nature. Definitely it was having some sort of internal weakness whose legacy has spoiled India or disturbed India since the last 7 decades. So my friend and viewers, here I have to share with you some idea, because even the second party should be given the chance, or second party should be given an audience to his ideas, so that he can plead his own idea, and we people have to make a judgment while keeping in my view the both different models of nationalism and two conflicting views and ideas about nationalism. So that's why in the third one lecture, I have selected the topic V.D. Savarkar. V.D. Savarkar and cultural nationalism. V.D. Savarkar and cultural nationalism. This trilogy of lectures, I think after going through all the 3 lectures, you people will be clear about the different nuances of, or you can say nuances of nationalism. Now I am moving to my first one lecture today, nationalism, how to change the world. So firstly, my students, here I have to inform you it is very difficult to give a single definition of nationalism. As I have told you earlier, there is not the any legitimate term for nationalism, better term is nationalisms. So that's why the single definition is not going to fit into this term nationalism. It is just like we cannot use the one fit for all sizes because they are the different size. So one fit for all size will not work here. Firstly, let me start. What is a classical definition? Here I am using the term classical. Classical definition. The classical model of nationalism was definitely built or prepared by Western Europe. So whenever you are using the term classical definition, so you can use the term classical definition and taking the inspiration from the model of Western Europe. In crude term, we can say that nationalism implies a community of the people which is guided by the same custom, tradition, and the common heritage that is being inspired by the same historical force, and finally, which was the product of the common historical consciousness. This is such a vague definition that even European nationalism type is not going to be fitted into the boundary of this definition. So just leave it and start observing what is the actual phenomena. If I'm just going to make you familiar with the different scholars, like, there is the French scholar who has defined nationalism and tried to define nationalism first in 1882, long before. And definitely his name is Renan. And then comes the term like Gellner. Even Stalin has tried to define nationalism in his own way. Then even Smith, a scholar, he has made a very comprehensive study of nationalism. You'll find a character, a name, that is Erich Hobsbawm, a Marxist historian. He has also made a serious study of nationalism. Here I have to make you clear, in fact, nationalism is a most dominant ideology of 20th century. It has started from 19th century onwards, but it became a very dominant ideology of 20th century. If you will just allow me to say, I can even make a claim that it is possibly the most forceful and influential ideology of the modern civilization. Even more than Marxism, you can say. Why? So there are the two different sorts of ideas. One idea is the idea of cosmopolitanism or universalism. The universalism, the idea believes that the whole world is one and the same. And in this concept of universalism, all the planning, all the things are going to be defined not in context of a region, but in universal context. Here you can say, when there was the rise of enlightenment in 18th century, you will just talk about European enlightenment of 18th century. It was having a universalist approach. The same happened in case of Marxism. Marxism started to talk in terms of world revolution. The whole world would be transformed, and that will be a rule by the one specific class, that is the proletariat class. Proletariat government, the proletariat world order. So that has been defined by Marxism. Likewise, you can say, even earlier than that, you might have heard about Islam. So even Islam was having the universalist idea. What is the universalist idea of Islam was? To convert the Darul Harb into Darul Islam. Darul Harb means what? The Darul means the world of the idolaters. Those who are just worshipping the different varieties of gods and as well as doing some sort of idol worship. So that is called Darul Harb. And the motto and objective and declared objective of Islam was to remove the idol worship from the world and to convert whole world into an Islamic world where the dictates and rules of Islam could be run, or the rite of Islam could be run there. So this was the basic declaration of Islam. My students, what is known as nationalism? So that is in that sense, if you are just going to compare it with Marxism, Islamic world, so it appears to be slightly parochial idea. मतलब it was parochial idea means कि यह थोड़ा सा संकीर्ण दृष्टिकोण रखता है. So that's why you are using that term parochial idea. Now, how did it emerge? Here you can take the example. This is the region 16th to 18th century Europe. (16th to 18th century Europe). Here you can say origin in one sense. That is European monarch. I am always suggesting my students to go through world history compulsorily because that will open the vistage of knowledge in the different segments of general studies, and particularly it can open the gate for your knowledge of international relations, international economy, even constitutionalism. So whenever you will observe the phenomena of Europe in medieval age, you will come to know that this is a particular region and there were three institutions. One institution was feudalism. This is Europe. I am talking about the whole of Europe here. This is feudalism. Then you can say church system. In church system, that was not like in India. The temple system or mutt system in India is different. There the church system was universal church system. Universal church system means the headquarter of church was Rome and the different branches of the church were spread to the different parts of Europe. And feudalism and universal church system. And there was one more institution that is called Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire was a big empire which spread to the north to southern part of Europe. So my students, here I have to inform you that there were three institutions in Europe. They were just like universal institutions. They were universal in their outlook in that sense that they were lying in whole of Europe. And whenever you have to make a nation, so you are supposed just to, earmark your national boundary, or a particular region should be earmarked separately. But if the three medieval institutions were lying there, so how can you earmark your national boundary and how could the nation state emerge? So here you will come to realize that it was the time because Europe was going to, a great ideological and commercial upheaval at that time. That was commercial revolution, mercantilism, Renaissance, Reformation, etc. So gradually all the three institutions declined. And it was the time there was the rise of monarchy on the graveyard of feudalism in Europe. So as there was the rise of monarchy, so European monarchs started to play the greater role. Now they were representing the different or prestigious dynasties of Europe, and they just tried to carve out their own boundary. So here I am giving the example of after the decline of the three institutions, you should know, three medieval institutions, because in three medieval institutions, once again, I am repeating, feudalism, universal church system, and Holy Roman Empire. So all were just antithetical to the concept of nation state. But fortunately, these institutions declined due to some internal and external factors, and as a result, you can say Europe became independent from the institutions. And it was the time there was the rise of some ambitious monarchs or some important dynasties. So they started to carve out their own region in the name of nation state. Britain, France, Spain, Holland, etc. So in Western Europe, and even in Eastern or Central Europe, you can say Prussia, Austria. So there was the rise of certain dynasty, Habsburg dynasty, Bourbon dynasty, Hohenzollern dynasty, and they started to carve out their own area. And they declared here this is a nation state. because every region you will just come to know, particularly in Western Europe, the region was not, you can say, too much diversified. It was here, you can say, cultural uniformity was almost prevailing in Western Europe. The single language, the German language, the French language, the English language. So what you know as there was the rise of some linguistic, the nation or concept of nation state based on a centralized state system, the ambitious monarchy, as well as the single one language. It was the time, you might have heard about a French king. His name was Louis XIV. So he made a very lofty declaration, I am the state and my usage law. I am the state and my usage law. So in this way, some ambitious monarchs created their own domain as the nation and tried to educate the people that you belong to this nation, the British nation, English nation, French nation, Dutch nation, etc. But my friends, here there was a major lacuna in this concept, because this state or this nation was the nation of monarch, and monarch was making the claim, his claim on this nation as his private property. It was not the nation of the people. So it was not the example of modern nation. Here I can cite the example, suppose this is the monarch, this is the case of France. So there is the monarch, and monarch is making the claim, you people, and try to educate the French people, you belong to a single nation. But basic problem was that this France was, or any other country, was internally divided. Internally divided in what way? Within the same boundary of the nation state, there was the two different varieties of the people. One variety of the people, you can say that belong to privileged section of society, privileged, Visheshadhikar Prapt. And another section belong to non-privileged section, Visheshadhikar Vihin. So internally this nation was divided. So just monarch was doing some work, some base work, but people were not going to accept it as the nation. So my student, this is the first model of nation state in Europe, but it was not in true sense a nation. So what you know as the modern nation, so this nation emerged after French Revolution. This nation emerged after French Revolution. French Revolution appeared to be a trendsetter. Whenever you are making a study of the French Revolution, the students and normally paying attention to what happened in France, the tumultuous day, the Jacobean terror, the great upheavals, जिसको उथल पुथल कहते हैं. But they are not going to take the notice that French Revolution started and became the father of democratization or democratization process in the world, and simultaneously French Revolution became even the father of modern nationalism. In what way? So earlier there was a monarch, and monarch was making the claim that I am the nation. But in course of the French Revolution, there was even the decline of monarchy, and rather you can say annihilation of monarchy as well. Institution of monarchy was annihilated for some time when the Louis XVI was just arrested, and even he was put to death. And it was the time the Rousseau's ideology. You might have heard about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau has given a theory of general will. General will means that sovereignty does not lie in monarchy. Sovereignty lies in the common people. So sovereignty lies in the common people. So common people are just authorized to form their own government at their own initiative. And what was the privileged section? What was the unprivileged section? So French Revolution just removed the dichotomy. Dichotomy in that sense, it has just destroyed the privileged section of privileges of the certain section of society. So all came on the common footing. There was the abolition of feudalism on 4th August 1789. So all the rights of feudal lords as well as the priest class in France, so the rights were completely annihilated. And then on 26th August 1789, there was the declaration of the rights of men and citizen. So even that was going to make a greater change. Ki now all the people were on equal footing, at least theoretically. So here you find ki now the subject people, here you can say the people were the subject people. Subject people means ki they were just what you know, Raja ki praja. So they were subject people. Now they became citizen. Citizen means Nagrik. What is the difference between the subject people and citizen? Subject people were just, you can say, the subordinate people of a monarch, and the monarch was creating the differentiation among the subject people. But citizen means it was not the subordinated to any monarchy or institution. It was subordinated to the rule of law, to the certain rules of the state, and all the people are having the equal rights. So this happened after French Revolution. So actually, my students, here single one point is that this is in true sense the rise of modern nationalism. This is in true sense the rise of modern nationalism. Okay? What model you have manifested earlier, it was not the true model of nationalism. True model of nationalism is modern nationalism, which developed after French Revolution. What was the feature here? Feature was that there was no more the people were the subject people of the monarch. They became the citizen, free people, equal status, and now they came on the equal footing within the state. All the rights and privileges were simply abolished, and there was the Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens for the first time in history in Europe, And one important thing is that whenever you will make a study of the French Revolution, and if you are having the specific interest in the study of European history, you will come to know about all European war. You might have heard about Napoleon Bonaparte. So, and even earlier than Napoleon Bonaparte, a war erupted between France and the rest of Europe, because when the revolution took a radical turn, so it started to threaten the old order in Europe. So European monarchs, while getting combined together, they invaded on France. And it was the time even the French people destroyed the institution of monarchy. So there was some elected government in the center, and it was the people's government which took the reign of the war against Europe. So this war was being led by the people, or the people's organization. So it was the first experiment in the history of the world, or the history of Europe, you can say, there was a big fight between the European monarchs, a big conflict, military conflict, and the people of France. So it was in this war, the people of France gave the slogan, the power of the people, and it is from the power of the people, there emerged the concept of the power of the nation. So Rousseau, General Will, and all European war, the Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens, the abolition of, different sorts of rights. So all resulted into the rise of the modern nation state, or the true nation state, you can say, in Western Europe. Here up, this is the background and historical knowledge. You people may be slightly bored about the gradual evolution and while observing the gradual evolution of nationalism. But one interesting thing I have to inform you, if someone is going to ask you, what is the criteria of modern nation? One criteria of modern nation is, it is the nation of the people, not the nation of the monarch. And the second one thing is, it was having some sort of bond among the people. But here there should be some cementing force which can bind the different people and different groups of the people. So in sum total and layman, my students, putting aside all the definitions of nationalism, the single one definition here I have to discuss with you is the nationalism requires some binding force, some bond among the different groups of the people. If there is some binding force, so this binding force will create a region, a community of the people into a nation. A controversy starts from here. How is the binding force, or how can the binding force be developed, and what should be the basis of bond? So it led to a long controversy about the rise of nations. One thing, in what way? Here, take the case of France. Taking inspiration from France, you will come to know in Western Europe, particularly in Western Europe, that is France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, Holland. So these are the different regions, They are already, you can say, unified state. Unified state is there. There is the, you can say, in more or less, you can say, cultural uniformity existed from earlier time. There was the dominance of the single language that existed from the earlier time. And then you can say even the European monarchs did some base work while promoting the common cultural heritage. So when there was the rise of modern nationalism in Western Europe, the whole process was too much smooth. If you are taking the example of, and putting aside the example of France, even in Spain, Britain, Portugal, Holland, there was a very peaceful transformation without any major rupture, any major difference, and the old state convert into a nation. But here I am stopping for a minute, because one question may just appear in your mind and you are just you are just willing to this question to me. What is the difference between a state and a nation? You may ask me the question. A state is a physical structure. A state is a physical structure, or nation is an idea. The physical structure can exist without idea. And in some case of the nations, even you will come to know, even the idea can exist without the physical support for some time. Up here, I am making you the thing clear. Physical structure means that a state implies a community of the people, the specific region or territory. Territory is the one feature. Secondly, you can say there may be some government, and even you can count sovereignty or not sovereignty, whatever may be. Sovereignty is not compulsory, but population, territory, what you can say geographical unit, and the government. So that should exist there. So that is a state. And even sovereignty you can count. So that is a state. But this state cannot be compulsorily a nation. For making it a nation compulsorily, you are supposed to develop a sense of bond among the people. अब जैसे here I am giving the example कि कई लोग ऐसे कहते हैं, हालांकि एक अलग इश्यू है जो मैं आपको लेक्चर नंबर 2 में डिस्कस करूंगा, कि बिफोर द एडवेंट ऑफ ब्रिटिश इन इंडिया, India was not a nation. What do they mean? What do they mean? They mean that before the advent of the British, Indians were not having any sense of bond among themselves. If the Marathas were being suppressed by the British, Marathas were being suppressed at that time. So even other, not to speak of the Muslim states, even not the other Hindu states were taking care of it. And Marathas were fighting the battle of Panipat against Ahmad Shah Abdali. It was the Hindu dynasty and Hindu kings. Even Indian kings didn't prefer to side with the Marathas, because they could not develop such a bond among the people. And after the British, due to some reasons, which I will discuss in the second one lecture, there was the rise of nationalism, and in what way the nation building in India became possible. So my point is that a state is a physical structure, but nation is an idea. So there is a German thinker, his name is John. So John has defined it in very interesting way. Without nation, the state is just like an artificial structure. Artificial structure, he does mean that if there is not the sense of bond among the people, so a state is not so effective. So it is just an artificial structure. So a state without nation is an artificial structure, but nation without the state is a shapeless phantom. What is shapeless phantom here? I have to make you clear. Shapeless phantom means, उसको बोलते हैं आकारहीन भूत. आकारहीन भूत का मतलब है कि हमारे पास आइडिया हो कि हम एक हैं. तो एक हैं तो कहाँ हैं? कहाँ हैं आपके पीपल? कोई सब बिखरे हुए हैं. You are not having a common territory. You are not having a population settled in a particular region, but you are having a sense of bond and association. So where will your nation exist? So both are depending over each other. A state cannot be powerful without the idea of a nation, and nation cannot survive without the support of the physical structure. Both are complementary to each other. I think my student, are you clear? मतलब आप में एक होने का भाव जब आता है तो नेशन बनता है. So that's why whenever I am teaching to my students, I am teaching my students particularly the topic of socio-religious reforms movement of 19th century, that is popularly known as Indian Renaissance. So I am making you clear that it is from here. In case of tribal movements, peasant movement, the maximum you can use the term proto-nationalist. But what you know as the modern nationalism that emerged after this Renaissance or Indian Renaissance, the religious and social movement of 19th century, because it is after that it did some sort of social surgery, weakening the gender division, regional division, caste division, so India can develop a sense of belonging to each other. And that's why there is the rise of modern nation after that. But I will discuss this phenomena in other lecture. So in this way, in Western Europe, the things became clear. Then when nationalism traveled from Western Europe to Central and Southern Europe, so there was another sort of question. In case of Germany and Italy, my students, you know, even if you are coming from the non-history background, but you are supposed to go through even if you are coming from non-history background, so at least you may go through history part in general studies. So you might have heard about Germany and Italy, they were the divided regions. Divided regions, you can say Germany was divided in 39 states. The Congress of Vienna divided it in 39 states, and Italy was divided into 7 major states, you know. But both Germany and Italy were having a sense of nation. A sense of nation means we have to develop as a nation. And German people, you know, they were basically, they belonged to the different category. They were just promoting the single language, German language, and the common German culture, and they were having the inspiration from their own past. Germany was being inspired from the past of the Protestant movement and Martin Luther, the history of Martin Luther, you know, Reformation. And Italy was being inspired by the heritage of Renaissance. And they were having a sense of common culture, they were having a sense of common language, but they were divided. So they fought for at least half a century. And then up to 1870, we'll come to know that Italy and Germany both were unified. So there the nation was first. In case of Western Europe, there was the state first, and then a state was transformed into a nation. In case of Germany and Italy, there appeared the nation first, and the nation searched its own state. Some critic has rightly quipped that this nation was already just like a bride. It was searching its own groom, and or in one sense you can say that the beauty was searching for its own princess, which became possible after several battles. And then up to 1870, Germany and Italy, which was a nation but not having the support of a common territory, so finally it was converted into a territorial nation state. But the same experiment, my student, whenever you just move here to Eastern Europe, so very horrific experience. It was horrific, and it could give a lesson to the people of the world. What was successfully performed in Western Europe, so it could create a major rupture in the life of Eastern Europe at that time. Because in course of the study of world history, will come to know, in fact, there were in world history part, you know, in this region, here you can see this region in Eastern Europe, there existed the 3 major empires. In Central Europe, Austrian Empire. In Eastern Europe, Ottoman Empire, that was a Muslim empire. Today, its legacy was carried by Turkey in Eastern Europe. You might have heard about as a modern state or nation. Then in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire, and in Central Europe, Austrian Empire. These were the multiracial empire, multilingual empire, multi-regional empire. So the question arose that whenever there was the creation of nation, in Western Europe there was the cultural uniformity, And there was earlier a powerful state which very smoothly was converted into nation. In case of, Germany and Italy, there was a very strong sense of bond and nation, but a state was missing, so a state was regained. But in case of the different empires in Eastern Europe, or the Central Europe, you can say Austrian Empire, Russian Empire, and Ottoman Empire, the problem was that these empires were basically multiracial, multilingual, and unfortunately, due to the lack of modernization or the transformation of the region, the people from different races and linguistic groups started to treat themselves as the separate nation. So in Eastern Europe, it was such a horrific experience that the Ottoman Empire and Habsburg Empire started to break away part, started to create the different nations. Today, you find so many nations in Eastern Europe. So it was either bearing the legacy of old Ottoman Empire or, Habsburg Empire. Habsburg Empire was in Austria or Austrian Empire, and Ottoman Empire in Southeastern Europe, you should know. So there you can say there was the rise of so many breakaway nations, And here in Eastern Europe, the issue became so much complicated and so much, ruptures it created in the region of Eastern Europe, and even West European nations and Central European nations were involved into this power politics in Eastern Europe. Finally, it culminated into the First World War. And whenever you will just come to know, after the First World War, it was American President Woodrow Wilson who came to address the Paris Peace Conference. So he declared that the people of Eastern Europe should be given the right to self-judgment, means the different linguistic groups should be allowed to make their own nation. So in this way, the problem would be solved. In case of Russia, you will come to know as there was the rise of communism, fortunately or unfortunately, after the First World War, and a communist government there created a centralized structure. So the disintegration of Russia lingered up to 1991, means the last of the 20th century. But this Ottoman Empire and Habsburg Empire made their fate up to the First World War, and there was the fragmentation of the empire and the creation of new nation states. But this nation state created so many problems of linguistic conflict, the creating of refugees, and even today the region is not settled, Yet the experience of nation is quite different. One thing. Second one thing, my student, I have to make you take notice of one more thing. And this thing is that whenever you are talking about the nation, or rather you can say modern nation, or rather you can use the term modern nation. So here you should know, in fact, the two processes was going simultaneously: modernization and nation building. Both the factors had to correspond to each other. Just realize one thing. When did modern nation emerge? When the people started to feel a bond. What type of bond? We are the single and the same. When we are the common and the same. That became possible after assertion of the right of the people at the cost of the monarchy, The abolition of feudalism, the abolition of inequalities, the imposed political and social inequalities by the previous authority. So then there was the rise of, there was a sense of the bond among the people, and the people emerged to be a modern nation. So my students, one important thing to be noticed is that the process of modernization and nation building just went side by side, because it was the process of modernization which made the people feel we are the single and the one. Okay. So this is the very important point to be noted. Second one thing, you will just go through the history of nation state, or the history of the nation from French Revolution up to the Second World War. You will come to realize one thing. Till the 150 wars, throughout the 150 years, there was the creation of so many nations in Europe. But problem is that even this nation building took the different forms in different regions, which I have just briefed you, in Western Europe, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe. That is one thing. Second one thing is that even nationalism changed its color. Nationalism changed its posture. Nationalism changed its attitude from time to time. When there was the demand of nationalism earlier, so demand was democratic and there was the rise of a middle class, and the middle class was making demand, and the serious demand from the established authority, that was the absolutist monarchy or feudal lords or church. So the middle class were just fighting for its liberation. So here nationalism appeared as a liberating force, making the democratic demand that we need a right to self-judgment. It made an appeal to the people to gather, come and be a collective force against the unjust authority of the time. So in this way, they fought against monarchy, the absolutist monarchy, the, you can say, stupidity of the aristocratic class. They fought together. They fought against the church. So in this way, you can say that this nationalism earlier appeared as the liberating force. But my student, after Industrial Revolution, when the search for market started by European countries and the rise of capitalism, so unfortunately, my students, now the problem started. Now the same nationalism became you can see, a coercive force, or it became aggressive, turned to be aggressive. Means at that time the European governments just started to take a very aggressive posture in the name of nationalism. They developed a sense of arrogance. We are the nation, we are the British nation, we are the French nation. Now can you imagine that a British at that time gave a slogan. What was the slogan? There is no sunset in our empire. While you can say with a strong sense of arrogance, taking umbrella in their hand in the midnight, I am just moving with the umbrella because there is no sunset in our empire. So this was the imperialistic arrogance or racial arrogance of the British. So the same happened in case of France. The France was asserting its own national identity and power. When there was the rise of Germany after unification, when Germany moved for industrialization, and it was in a strong search of the market, so even Germany made the counter slogan, we also need the earth and need the land under the sun. And it is on this slogan Germans fought against the British. An unfortunate condition was the two world wars in Europe. Two world wars was the product of aggressive nationalism. So this nationalism just originated as a liberating force, but it became the oppressive force in the world. So my friends, whenever we got freedom, later I will inform you, up to this period, we have even observed the ugly face of nationalism as well. Earlier there was the benign face, but after benign face, the same nationalism adopted the ugly face up to the Second World War. So I think this up to this point clear. Up. Now, turn to another force. From Europe to other continents. Up outside of Europe, if you are taking the example of USA, which was the first colony to be liberated, and after that the USA was transformed itself into a modern and powerful nation. So if you are just leaving USA or certain USA, and so then you will find that the rest of the world was at that time colonies. The rest of the world was colonies. So here the question arises that this nationalism became just a contagious disease. Such a contagious disease that even Marxism could not counter it. Marx was deadly opposed to this nationalism. He used to take this nationalism as the bourgeoisie ideology. It is just like the bourgeoisie ideology, the middle class ideology. And the middle class, in order to divert the workers from the path of revolution, it has consciously invented the so-called aggressive nationalism, that there is no sunset in our empire, so that the workers would be just lost into a sense of national glory, and it would be diverted, and they would be diverted from their course of revolution. So this is the main motive. They just try to prove it. But my students, here the point is that nationalism became such a formidable force that it traveled to other continents as well. But here you have to be careful about the two facts, other continents. One, how did it manifest? How did it manifest? And the second point is, what challenges it came to face. There are the two questions, two issues need to be discussed. When nationalism just moved to colonies, so first is difference in manifestation. So in case of Europe, you will come to know that nationalism appeared, or nationalism just originated side by side the rise of modernization, and then the rise of market and capitalism, because unfortunately or fortunately, in case of Europe, the modernization corresponded to the market forces and the rise of market or capitalism. So capitalism, modernization, what you know as commercial revolution, so all were just common facets of the same phenomena, and that is modernization. So some critic has told that in case of Europe, the market played a very important role in the rise of nationalism. You may be slightly confused how can you link the term market to the rise of nationalism. So market means the commercial revolution, and then there was the rise of a middle class, or you can say the commercial revolution and the industrial revolution, and there was the rise of middle class. And what you know as nationalism, that is the middle class ideology. So middle class ideology, as the Europe was undergoing a phase of capitalist transformation, so there was the rise of nationalism. But if you are just moving to the colony, you will find that in colonial states were having the different experience, because their uneven development, even the economy was not developed, some agrarian economy, some were the certain pockets of industries as well. So it was a mixture of modern and medieval economy in colonies. So in colonies, you will not find such the role of industrialization as you find in case of Europe. So market was not working as the force for the rise of nationalism in colonies, but in colony there was a new factor which was missing in Europe. The factor was protest. Protest means national movement. Means in colonies, nationalism appeared in course of the fight against the colonial power itself. This was the specialty of nationalism in colonies. It was a fight against colonial power. Colonial power, this fight gave some catalysm for nationalism in the colonies. This is the one point of difference, Second point of difference, when there was the rise of nationalism in Western Europe, that is supposed to be a classical model of nationalism. So there you can see, when there was the rise of nationalism, so people started to reflect their loyalty to the state. So nationalism there implied the loyalty to the state, the dedication to the state. But in colonies, unfortunately, the people were ruled by a coercive government, a coercive colonial government. So their people could not develop a sense of loyalty to the state. Rather, here in colonies, a different experience was that reflecting disloyalty and conflict against the state, they could develop their nationalism. In their fight against the state, their own state, and this state was imposed by a colonial power. So in course of the fighting against the state, they could develop their nation. Second thing. Third thing is that in case of Western Europe, there was some sort of cultural and linguistic uniformity. So that's why they became very successful whenever they started to create the nation. So they can make a homogeneous community. There is the homogeneity is implied in the model of Western Europe. But these nations the states or colonial states in Asia-African countries, it was multi-racial, multilingual, regional, and most of the states were not having even a sense of common heritage. You will take here the case of African continent. My students, I will request you people to go to, suppose you have to make an understanding of the modern Africa or the movements in modern Africa today, the problem of Ethiopia, Sudan, or any other country. So go into history and try to find out that basically African society was a tribal society. And what you know as the modern nation in Africa, so that was created artificially by European powers. And particularly, you can say that at the time of Berlin Congress, which was being presided over by Bismarck in 1884, that was called the Berlin African Congress. So in Berlin African Congress, Bismarck, while sitting in Berlin, divided the boundary of Africa. So boundary was the artificial boundary that was imposed by the colonial power there. I mean, the single one nation, you can say, so many tribes, so many ethnic groups were clubbed together. They were clubbed together. I mean, in case of, I think, you can say Nigeria, I think 250 tribes are there, or 250 ethnic groups are there. The problem is that which will work as a binding force. So there the binding force was who? Binding force was a fight against colonial power. They just try to search the common fate among themselves in their fighting against the colonial power and in course of the national liberation. But once there was the exit of colonial power, the old tribal feuds reappeared or resurfaced. So that is the present malady of African continent, the resurfacement of the old ethnic and tribal conflict after exit of colonial power. In case of Asia and Southeast Asia, almost all the countries, even South Asia, I will just come to know, India is a representative model that was multi-ethnic, multicultural. In case of India, unity in diversities. Now the case is that the same model of nationalism was being appropriated, and the model of nationalism was appropriated by these countries. So one by one, the model started to be exhausted and failed, creating somewhere civil war, somewhere partition, somewhere fragmentation. So then, but this nationalism was such a universal idea that you cannot keep yourself away from nationalism. Means that every country had to be restructured within the nation. And all Asian African countries adopted it. Even there was the time in 1990s, the rise of globalization, there is the term globalization, and a conflict between the global and the national interest started. So finally, it was the national interest which prevailed over globalization. And this nation state or the nationalism even, swallowed up globalization within that. And now globalization is simply a very fashionable term among intellectuals. In real sense, globalization never existed. Nation state always prevailed over the common universal interest. So my student, now in the second world lecture, I have to make you clear that perceiving the experience of different colonies, and India was the first liberated colonies after the Second World War. So India can be a model type. How did India can fight against this challenge? Being a multiracial, multilingual, while the European model of nationalism was giving emphasis over the cultural uniformity, the homogeneity of the common heritage, and one language, one country. On German language, Germany was created. On English language, the British United Kingdom was created. And on French language, France was created. India was multi-linguistic, multi-regional, multi-communal. How could India do its own experiment? So my students, you will never miss this lecture, because you may come to know that through Gandhian movement of Satyagraha or non-violence, India may have contributed a lot to the liberation movement for the people of the world. But India also gave a new model, new ideal type, and that was a new model of nation building. And that will be the topic of my, as I have told you, that will be the topic of my second lecture, how unique is Indian nationalism or Indian nation. How unique is Indian nation? I'll just discuss in the second one lecture. So my students, go through this lecture and just wait for the second one and third one lecture, V.D. Savarkar and cultural nationalism. How justified is V.D. Savarkar in criticizing the, model of Indian nationalism, which was adopted at the time of independence. So I have to discuss all these topics. Thank you very much. Today I just appear from time to time.